Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Astrology One Podcast. Today I have Garima Garg with me, who is a journalist and a writer. She did her bachelor's degree in economics from Delhi University and a master's in journalism from Columbia University. She's worked at Hindustan Times in Delhi and then worked independently for 3 years, writing about culture, business for publications like The Hindu, Scroll, Outlook magazine, and many more. Last year, she got a book deal with Amazon Westland to write a book about astrology, which is tentatively titled Story of Astrology. The book will be published sometime later this year or early next year. Welcome to the show, Garima. How are you doing
Thank you.
today?
Thank you for having me, Ankit. I'm good. How are you?
Good, good, all good here. So, tell me about your background. How's your education been like? What's your family like? And how did you get into astrology?
Right. So I'm born and brought up in Delhi. My family is originally from Punjab, so like the Punjabi Baniyas culture. But we never had astrology, as like much of a part of our life. My
Mm-hmm.
dad has a family friend astrologer that he visits whenever he wants some counsel. But otherwise, it's not like we are named after our nakshatras or like there's not a lot of astrology in our life before. So I came to astrology about a couple of years ago when I was
Mm-hmm.
working on a story about astrology. So I noticed a lot of people who were my batchmates or friends from Columbia. So they would engage with a lot of like astrology memes and post about apps like co-star and platform. So that was really interesting for me as an Indian because you know in India, even people who visit astrologers regularly, even a lot of them they don't want to admit that they're visiting astrologers. So
Right.
they're taboo to that level, right? So that was really interesting for me, and I started looking into it, and I felt like there was a story there, and then I picked it to an American publication that writes about South Asian diaspora in particular. So there was this paradox to explore, right? India versus US, how
Mm-hmm.
they look at astrology. And so I spoke to a lot of people who were millennials in US and in India, astrologers, and that's when I got in touch with you. So you were both a millennial and an astrologer.
Right.
So yeah, I did that story, but like I kept exploring a bit, even on a personal level, because at the same
Mm.
time, during this was like second half of 2019, right? So one of my aunts also attended Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. She was studying astrology there,
Okay.
and she saw my chart and she was like, oh, you're an Aries ascendant. So until then, I had grown up thinking that I was a Cancer person. Like my birthday is June  24th, so I thought I'm Cancerian. But then she said Aries, and I was like, Cancer and Aries are two very different archetypes, right? So I got interested and I started looking into it, and I found out that at that time I was going through my Ketu Mahadasha,
Mm.
and my Ketu is in this nakshatra of Ardra. So when I read about Ketu and Ardra, I was like just reading about those things, listening about those things, it helped me understand my experiences. Like I'd
Mm-hmm.
already done like 6 years of that Ketu, right? 7 years. So I'd done
Right.
6 years of it. So it helped me understand my experiences a lot. So I just kept looking into it on a personal level, and then the story happened. But then I didn't like pursue it professionally more than that. So the story got published in January 2020, and at that time I was working on a couple of other projects, so I like
Right.
forgot about it and so on. But then the pandemic happened in March, right? And my other projects fell through. So
Mm-hmm.
I had to do something. Like I was looking for work, and I had to do something. And I just thought, like I had always wanted to write a book. Like it was one of my professional, far off goals kind of thing. So I
Mm.
used the story to pitch it to a literary agent who is the person that I'm working with now.
Mm.
So he expressed interest in it, and eventually I developed a pitch, and the book deal happened in July
Mm.
last year. So that's how I came
Nice,
into
nice, nice.
astrology.
Right, right, right. Nice. Very interesting. So, okay. So essentially, once you started diving slightly more deeper into it, you resonated more with whatever was being written, whatever was being said, right? Now,
Right, right.
when you're doing something of that sort, you're also obviously talking about it to different people, maybe your friends, your family at times,
Yeah.
and all of that. How was that experience? Like, you specifically spoke about the difference in the slight biases or how astrology is perceived within India and West. How was it perceived within your household and within your close family friends?
Well, so my family has been open-minded, but they didn't really pay attention to me
Hmm.
until like I started writing the book. So
Right.
I mean, there was no taboo amongst my family and friends. There was no taboo. There
Hmm.
was no sense of like, why are you wasting your time or whatever. People were open-minded. People were
Hmm.
listening,
Hmm.
and they were like happy that I am writing a book and so on and so forth. Uh, so that didn't happen. And the thing is that, in my research, like even when I was working on the story and I spoke to you, you told me about the research at Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. And then I came across a lot of YouTube channels. And
Hmm.
there are apps like Cosmic Insight, which can, far outdo something like CoStar. So obviously, I could see that the landscape of Jyotish has changed a lot. And it was a
Right.
complete, like, it was a discovery for me. I did not know anything about it. Like un- around mid 2019, I did not know anything. Like what is the nakshatra, what is the kundli.
Hmm.
I'd always seen my kundli, but I had no idea. The only astrology I knew was okay, I'm in Cancer Sun, and that's it. So as I discovered more and more, I told people more and more, and like I told my family members that they would also look up their their placements and all of that. So I think there was a genuine interest. So there was
Hmm.
no taboo or anything. And even with my literary agent and like Westland, so they felt like it's a good time to write about astrology, like market
Hmm.
wide, because the kind of times we're living in, there's so much uncertainty, and so there are so much there's like this rise of spirituality market, right? So it's not
Hmm.
just
Hmm. Hmm.
astrology that's on the rise. People are also getting into tarot, or people are consulting psychics, and
Right.
so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that stuff happening, and both Westland and my literary agency felt like it was a good time to write, and they liked that. you know. So in this book, you are not going to learn anything about astrology. You're not going to
Hmm.
learn like how to read a chart, or like what is Aries, what is Cancer. You're going to know about 15 different aspects of astrology, right? So astrology
Okay.
starts from cosmology, then we get into astrology, then there are some texts that are related to astrology, there are arts and culture related to astrology. So there are a lot of different aspects like this. So, and I think that was an important thing to do, because we perceive astrology to be this monolith. Right? People hear the word astrology and they immediately get some kind of an image in their head.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
cannot think of it being very, multifaceted.
Hmm.
So, like it was interesting for me to discover even as I was researching and writing about it. So I hope it would be the same for anyone who reads about it.
Hmm. Hmm. So, is there some sort of a like from what I understand, you're looking at aspects of astrology or covering subjects which are where astrology has an influence outside on other fields, and
Mhm.
other fields also have an aspect on astrology in some sense. Is that what you're talking about?
We can say that. So I think, see, astrology is the instinct to predict the future, the instinct to know what's going
Hmm.
to happen. It's very primal, right? It's not
Hmm.
something that we have today. It was there amongst early humans. So they wanted to
Hmm.
know when it was going to rain, and they wanted to know how they can use the stars to navigate, and so on and so forth. So astrology is basically something that comes to us very naturally as humans, when we
Right.
like start to live our life. So I don't see astrology as like an isolated thing about human life. I think it's
Hmm.
something very intrinsic, and yes, it has had impact on a lot of different aspects of our life, like astronomy. There are a lot of influential thinkers like Srinivas Ramanujan, who was a mathematician. He was into astrology.
Hmm.
Kepler was into astrology. And now, millennials are so much into astrology, whether we talk about US or the rest of the world. In India, we have a complicated relationship with astrology. So, uh, I feel it's just that it's something very intrinsic, and I'm just trying to trace the astrology in different parts of our life. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not something isolated. I'm just like trying to see behind, like hiding in plain sight thing, right? So the days of a week,
Mm-hmm.
they are named after the
Mm-hmm.
planets. So it's that sort of
Right.
thing. So we cannot isolate the days of the week and astrology, because
Agreed.
like Sunday is named
Right.
after
Right.
sun
Right.
and Monday is named after moon. So I think what I'm trying to do is really just like pull the veil of the various different aspects of things and see where astrology can be found, whether it's in literature or science or like
Mm-hmm.
days of a week or a ritual or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the
No, that absolutely makes
idea.
sense. Right. So, any other links that you can talk about which you've sort of researched on or discovered recently within the past couple of years, where you've seen, okay, this is not uh, a regular person who's not into astrology might not know about this, but it is very clearly linked with the early astrology phases and how it was started and how they were learning. Anything that you can talk about that
So
which
I
you found
think
us?
what people don't understand is that again, like astrology does not exist in vacuum, right? It's something that
Hmm.
comes very naturally to us. So it started with just looking up into the sky. We looked at the sun, we looked at the moon, and we looked at the five main planets.
Right.
And we looked at all these seven bodies and we correlated that to whatever was happening down below. So
Hmm.
and this is what I find very interesting, because you can look at any astrological system. You can look at the Mayan system, you can look at the Greek system, you can look at the Indian system. Mars will always have the same signification. Mars will
Hmm.
always be related to like action and war and like violence or anything like that.
Right.
Jupiter will always have the same signification. Like in the Mesopotamian civilization, Jupiter was associated with a deity called Marduk,
Hmm.
and like Jupiter is actually the main planet in a lot of ancient civilizations, and that's because it's like the largest planet. And as the
Hmm.
largest planet, it is always associated with wisdom or being generous or religion itself. So I think that is the common link between different astrological systems, that all of these human beings, whether they interacted with each other or not, they develop similar signification for all the seven planetary bodies that we saw
Hmm.
up above.
Hmm.
So I think that is what people don't understand. That someone who's not into astrology or who's not informed enough, people think it's like random. Like why is Saturn this planet related to old age, or like why is it a harsh planet? So there's a reason why people feel like that. So it's not a coincidence that like in Greek civilization or in India we have similar signification for Saturn. So it's not a coincidence. So there must be a reason,
Right.
right? They must have observed something. They must have correlated some kind of movements up there and down here. So that is something that people should look into, and maybe be a bit more open-minded to explore.
Right. 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 So do you, and while we're at it, so do you also see this relation with? I know your core field is astrology, but do you also see this sort of the relation between astrology and other divination arts, let's say tarot or
Yeah.
any other forms that you've come across or that you've researched on a bit?
So, see, other divination arts, I don't know how much they use the like planet and stars, but I think all divination
Hmm.
practices, including astrology, have, I think, the underlying understanding is that your future
Hmm.
and your larger reality is encoded in you. Right. So whether you are going to a
Hmm.
palmist, the palmist will see it through the lying on your hand. The astrologer will see it through the time and place and the day you were born. The tarot card reader will
Right.
see it through
Right.
whatever card you pick up. So subconsciously, your reality
Hmm.
and your future, your destiny is already there in you. All of these other people, they are just going to try and
Hmm.
help you find it, because I mean, you can meditate on
Right.
it,
Right. Right.
you can go into yourself and you can meditate on it. But if you cannot do it, then you can go to an astrologer, or maybe you can take the help of an astrologer or the help of a tarot card reader, and then you can meditate on that, and then you can find out
Hmm.
whatever resonates
Right.
from with you. So, I mean, in a simple, if I have to put it simply, then I think all divination arts understand that you should really listen to yourself. You know, whatever your heart tells you, whatever your soul tells you, whatever your inner
Hmm.
voice tells you.
Hmm.
If you can listen to that, maybe you can figure out what to do, what the next step to take. And if you cannot do that, maybe you can go to one of the fortune tellers, and you can
Right.
get some guidance.
Right.
So that is something that I think is common to all divination
Right. One of
practices.
the right on this only. So one of the interesting things that I've sort of realized in the past few years, and also seen many other astrologers who've been practicing for past 30, 40 years. Everybody talks about this, and that you're able to predict well or predict correctly only when you are sort of balanced,
Yeah.
and only when you're sort of balanced and sort of go deeper down inside, then you're able to hear the voice that is actually coming out. So to read a kundli or to read a chart or to read a hand, you won't be able to extract the correct information unless you yourself are sort of balanced, even if you are the
Yeah.
seer, even if you are one of those. So go interesting point. So so tell me now, you've stayed in these states for a while. You've come back to India. You've also been interacting with students and people over there. You
Yeah.
specifically talk about millennials over there and here. How do you see, what sort of differences do you see between both? So, right from the perspective of the perception towards this field, to also how what are the newer advances that are happening? Any core major differences, major areas that you see?
Well, I think the major difference that so I think there are different parts of this answer. So
Hmm.
I will start from the like basic difference between like Jyotish and the Western astrology.
Yeah.
So the main difference is that Jyotish is based on the philosophy of karma. And
Mm-hmm.
in looking at karma, we're like trying to give fate a logical basis, right? So in Western astrology, fate is just fate. There's no explanation for why fate is fate. But in Indian astrology, we have like, okay, you must have done something in your past birth and so on and so forth. So
Hmm.
the understanding that an Indian will have about fate and the understanding that a non-Indian will have about fate, let's say a Western person will have about fate, will be very different, right? So
Mm-hmm.
in India, astrology is a part of our life. It's a way of life. Whether we believe in
Mm-hmm.
astrology or not, we will, get a muhurat for, let's say, if you want to get married, or if you want to do a housewarming party, or if you want
Hmm.
to
Right.
start up a new venture. So we interact with astrology even without realizing. We're too close to astrology, in fact, so
Right.
that we cannot really have a bird's eye perspective of what astrology is. Whereas in the West, astrology was practiced freely until 17th century, but then a shift
Mm-hmm.
happened. So they shifted from a model. They shifted the model of universe. So until 17th century, they used to think that the Earth was the center of the universe, which was given by Ptolemy, and then they came to realize that it's the sun that is the center of the solar system, which was given by Copernicus, right? So at that time, they felt like this completely invalidates astrology, and though astrology was like pushed to the fringe. So
Hmm.
right now, astrology is this, it's this thing that has become a counterculture tool in the West. Right? So anyone who wants to reject the mainstream is going to adopt astrology. So astrology is actually quite popular amongst like LGBT groups in the West, because they see themselves being represented in something like astrology. So that's a thing. And So they are not as intimately connected with astrology in the Western society. They were that wasn't there even before 17th century, and that is not there even now. Now there's that
Hmm.
conflict between science and astrology and religion. So my point is that there's a lot of difference. There's a lot of inherent difference between how an Indian understands fate and astrology and how a Western person understands fate and astrology.
Right.
So for them, it's something completely cut off from their social and cultural life, and they are using it as a tool. Like they can isolate it. We cannot isolate it.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I cannot isolate Jyotish from being a Hindu. Like I know I have a nakshatra, and I know if like some religious ritual happens, then my family is going to find out a muhurat and all of that. So I think what that does is that we are unable to take a isolated or a bird's eye view of astrology, and even because astrology has been so prevalent in India, it's still so prevalent. Like I can find an astrologer at every uh, like nook and cranny and whatever.
Yeah. Right.
So and the problem is that most of these, like 90 to 95% of these astrologers, they're not like real astrologers. They're just parroting whatever they've learned, or they will maybe even try to take advantage of your insecurities or
Hmm.
your fears or whatever. So we have a very complicated relationship. So we are too close to it,
Hmm.
and we have had such a negative experience. So we are not able to look at it in any other way. Whereas that is not the same for a Western person.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that is the basic difference in, I would say, perception. As far as the practice is concerned, so I think because so the good thing that happened is because of whatever was happening in the West, right? So people in the West started re exploring astrology sometime around mid 20th century. So they started like having these associations for astrology conferences. They started researching into it. So that had a good impact on Vedic astrology as well. So people started forming conferences for Vedic astrology, and over the time, Jyotish is also being readapted for the modern time. So like people are researching into it all over the world. People are trying to study it in a academic way, in a scholarly
Hmm.
way. They have like YouTube channels. There are so many YouTube channels, like that KRS channel, Komila Sutton, so many people, and they're giving all these new interpretations. So earlier, if someone told me, okay, I have so and so placement, I had no way of knowing what it meant. An astrologer could just tell me the
Right.
prediction for it. But now I can go online, and I can find like hundreds of videos and so many articles on the same placement, and I can form my own perspective of it based on whatever my experience
Hmm.
has been. So that is a different thing that has happened, which is I think which is interesting because see in I think Jyotish is a lot more intricate when
Hmm.
it comes to like your personal placement. Like in Western astrology, you are a Pisces moon, but in Indian astrology, you might have there are three different nakshatras which fall under the realm of Pisces, and like each of nakshatra is divided in four parts. So there are a possible 12 interpretation for it, right? For the
Hmm.
same placement.
Right.
So I feel like that has been a good thing. People are like
Slightly.
discovering more and more about Vedic astrology. There's more and more awareness. There's more and more education. And the ironic thing is that it has happened because of Western astrology. What people were doing
Right.
with Western astrology in the West. So
Hmm.
Vedic astrology has much to thank to the West, I think, in that respect.
That primarily the the growth that is sort of coming up is being driven a lot by Western astrology. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, especially the popular
Okay.
growth. Because
Hmm.
on ground in India, people have been doing a lot of research. Like you told me about K. N. Rao sir. So he has been researching into astrology since I think late 80s, and he has
Prior to that, yeah.
a bank of like thousands of horoscopes. So
Hmm.
people had been working on ground in India, but the popular growth, like for someone like me, I did not have access to like Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan or K. N. Rao sir. I have access to YouTube or
Hmm.
Twitter. So for an average person, the popular growth has been driven, I think, primarily because of West.
Right. 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 Right, makes sense. So, have you come across any other schools, any other institutions who are also researching, who have a slightly more detailed and a much more enhanced research areas and stuff like
So
that?
in the West, there is something called the Project Hindsight.
Okay.
It was started in the 90s by three
Mm-hmm.
astrologers. No, actually, not they were not all of them astrologers. I think two of them were astrologers. It is currently, I think, I'm not sure if it is currently under operation, but one of the main astrologers associated with it was Robert Hand, who is one of the major astrologers in the Western world right now.
Mm-hmm.
So what they did was they started translating medieval astrology texts
Okay.
because they felt like the Western astrology had become too like pop culture-ish because they inculcated planets like Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, and a lot of people feel like that is not like you cannot study these planets because they have not completed a revolution around Earth. So how are you even going to study what has been their impact on like life on Earth? So they want to go back to the medieval form of astrology, which was
Mm-hmm.
somewhere around maybe 10th to 17th century. So they
Okay.
have been translating a lot of Hellenistic and Arabic texts. So that is something that has happened. That is so any serious astrologer in the West today will rely more on the medieval astrology than on the like astrology of outer planets.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting.
That is something that has changed over there as well. And
Okay.
it's so interesting because in India we're trying to modernize astrology. We're trying to readapt like our like older texts to the current times. Whereas in the West, they are trying to go back to a medieval form of astrology. They're trying to like get away from this pop culture psychological form of astrology and like go back to just predictions and stuff. So
Right.
that
Right.
was
Right.
another paradox that I thought was interesting.
Right. 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 Makes sense. Interesting this thing. So, while it's interesting that you bring out that point, how the landscape is sort of slightly changing in India as well. So, do you see that there is more pop culture that is sort of or pop culture-ish astrology that is seeping in into India, or do you see that there is a lot more database research that is starting to happen in the past few years because of this sort of this growth, spurts of growth that you're seeing?
Um, so I'm not exactly sure how much I can say that astrology is becoming popular in India because in India it has always been popular.
Mm.
So
Okay.
but what I can say is that Vedic astrology is sort of like becoming that pop culture thing, but amongst people who are not Indians, like people who are Americans
Okay.
or Westerners. I see that on Twitter all the time. Like there are so
Yeah.
many more non-Indians who are into Vedic astrology, and they're giving all these new kinds of interpretations to various placements, nakshatra or planets, which might or might not be correct.
Hmm.
I am no one who says I do not know anything about astrology, but I do think that that pop culture thing is happening to Vedic astrology, just not being done by Indians. So Indians who are trying to modernize
Hmm.
astrology, Jyotish, I think they are sticking to a more traditional form of it. They are more into like remedies and like mantra, and that kind of thing, without being too. So I think Indians who are trying to modernize astrology, they're trying to strike a balance between tradition and modernity because they're coming from tradition
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they understand the need to
Hmm.
modernize it. Whereas, what
Right.
is happening with a lot of non-Indians who practice Vedic astrology is that they are not coming from the tradition, and there are different levels of it. Like there are a lot of serious practitioners, and like they are doing great work, but there are a lot of non-serious practitioners as well who are making that pop culture thing out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So there are
Mm-hmm.
different all
Mm-hmm.
these different aspects to it.
Right. 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 Makes sense. So coming back to your book, so any specific interesting instances or any specific things that you sort of discovered in your research that you would want to talk about, you want to highlight? Uh, that are there.
So I really liked what I found out about nakshatras. I had no idea about nakshatras
Acha.
before that. So
Mm-hmm.
see, the thing is, we think something so traditional as Jyotish, it will be traditional in
Mm-hmm.
every aspect. But if you look at nakshatras like Ardra, and if you look at the nakshatra of Magha, so these are two
Mm-hmm.
completely opposite nakshatras. Ardra is all
Yeah.
about like breaking the norms of the society and so on and so forth. Magha is all about carrying forward your lineage. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, it's interesting that something as traditional and as we think of it as orthodox, something that is perceived as to be so orthodox has space for such wide, human behavior. So we think that rebelling against the existing norms is something that started now, something that started in the last 50 years. Nakshatras. So if you look at nakshatras, there are 27 nakshatras. There used to be 28 nakshatras, but for astrology purposes now they consider 27 nakshatras. And all of them show a very different archetype of human behavior, right? So you have nakshatra of Ardra, which is ruled by Rudra, and you have the nakshatra of Magha, which is ruled
Mm-hmm.
by the Pitris. So these two have completely opposite interpretations. So Ardra is all about like breaking the existing norms of the society wherever you are in the world. So you could be breaking the norms in a remote Indian village. You could be breaking the norms in like a posh Mumbai colony, or you could be breaking the norms in like Southwest America or New York City. Wherever you are, you will be breaking the norms of the society. Maga, on the other hand, is carrying forward your
Lineage.
lineage, which is, I think, mostly paternal
Mm.
lineage, right? So it is doing whatever your previous generations have been doing. Again, you could be located anywhere in the world,
Mm-hmm.
but you will be carrying forward that lineage.
Mm-hmm.
So these are two very different things. And I think what people don't appreciate about astrology or about Jyotish in particular is that it understands that people have always been a certain way. So rebelling against the existing norms is not a modern thing. People have been doing it since the start of the
Right.
time, basically. And carrying forward your family lineage is not something that is like old fashioned or traditional. It's something that people have been doing since the beginning of time and will do in future as well. So like for me it was interesting because it showed that astrology is not necessarily something that is traditional or orthodox or limited. It includes a wide range of
Mm-hmm.
human
Mm-hmm.
behavior, so which is pretty universal, which can be found in India, which can be found in United States, which
Mm-hmm.
could be found in second century, which is found today, and which will be found even like 100 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it very universal, and I think that is the reason why astrology survives. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
so that was something that I learned.
Interesting. Interesting. Nice. And anything about the Western astrology also, slightly similar. Um,
So about Western astrology, I really liked the psychological form of astrology, which can be traced back to
mm-hmm.
Carl Jung, who was a
Right.
psychoanalyst. And so, what he used to do is he used to like use astrology for some of his more difficult patients. Like when he couldn't figure out what
Mm.
was wrong with the person, he would look at their charts. And he experimented with astrology a lot. His experiments were not all that successful, but it did lead to the formation of something called
Mm-hmm.
psychological astrology. So I like how they use, the planets and the placement and so on to understand the psyche, which I think can also be very interesting, and that is also part of the
Mm-hmm.
nakshatra. In fact, to understand the psyche, like how does the person's mind work? From your
Right.
mind, everything flows, right? From your mind, your choices flow, your behavior flows, and anything that happens to you, two people are not going to react to it the same way. They're going to react
Right.
to it
Right.
based on their psyche, and the psyche is bigger than what your childhood experiences have been, or what your like early life experiences have been. So psyche is something inherent. That is
Mm-hmm.
something that Carl Jung said, and that actually gives more credence to something like karma. So So we are not born as a blank slate. We whatever we are born as
Right.
is also part of our karma. If someone is born as someone, a more aggressive person, or if someone is born as a calmer person, so that's
Right.
because of their karma, and that is going to define their life. So I think psychological astrology is
Mm-hmm.
closer to like Jyotish, or we can say that nakshatras are closer to psychological astrology. So that is something that I
Nice.
think is interesting. But it's not a part. It's not a part of like if I talk about people who are serious astrologers and like reinterpreting medieval texts, so they are not. They don't make such a psychological interpretation of
Okay.
placements. They tend to stick
Mm-hmm.
more to the predictions, which is what we have seen in India traditionally. That people are more like, okay, if you have so and so placement, it means so and so thing. There is no room for a psychological or a nuanced interpretation.
When you talk about psychology and astrology, if you look at Vedic astrology, you're everybody essentially starts off with the moon, right? And moon being the mind, that is where the first um, sort of the seed of when you're looking at a chart begins, and that's how you're essentially judging as to how a person will react to a specific situation, whether they'll be calm and composed about it, whether they'll take an action about it, whether they'll be stressed by it, or whatever this thing is. That then results in the action, which is then seen by the ascendant and other areas of the charts and different other varga charts, right? So you're in some ways correct that yes, probably it is slightly linked, but I mean, when you're talking about nakshatras and when you're talking about the moon and when you're talking about the psychological analysis, um, but it's not, there is that wholesome view that does exist over here, I feel.
Right. Yeah, so that's absolutely correct. But I think in Western astrology, I am not sure if they interpret like from the moon.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure
Okay.
if they make a moon chart. I don't think they do. They interpret from
Okay.
ascendant only. So the psychological interpretation they give primarily based on the outer planets, which is Pluto, Uranus, and
Acha.
Neptune.
Okay.
So they use that to like talk about a person's like psychological issues
Oh.
and complex
Okay.
stuff. So they don't interpret it through moon. So that
Okay.
is done in Jyotish,
Okay. Okay.
and
Interesting.
that's why I said it closer to it tracks with nakshatras, right? So nakshatras
Ah.
are related to the moon.
Hmm.
So that's why.
Sure. Okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. So many interesting things out here. So, so when is the book coming out? You mentioned the end of this year and sometime early next year. What stage are you at right now?
So the writing is complete. I completed
Mm-hmm.
the writing by April end. But then there was the COVID second wave, and now there are fears of a third wave as well.
Hmm.
So we don't know when the book can be published or launched. But I'm expecting either later half of 2021 or early next year.
Okay.
But the
Okay.
writing is complete with the editing and the other stuff
Okay.
that is left.
Good. 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 So really, really interesting. Really good to have you here, Garima. All the best for your book. What is the place? What is the best place to for people to reach out to you if they want to discuss more, read about your book, and anything related to all of this?
So people can email me or reach me on Twitter. So the first part of it remains the same, which is Garima Garg underscore, which is GARIMAGARG underscore.
Sure.
On Twitter, that's my handle, and my email is garimagarg underscore at outlook.com. So that would be a good place to reach.
Super.
And thank you so much for having me on your channel, Ankit. It was great to discuss astrology with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A pleasure. Pleasure, Garima. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Take care.